welcome everyone. Good morning. This is our 13th webinar looking at the future of the world after the pandemic. We've kind of organized one every week starting in April and kind of looking at the role of tech in the recovery and the resilience of our economies after COVID-19. Delighted to move on to infrastructure this week and next week. We're talking about data infrastructure this week and telecom infrastructure next week. A lot of questions about how the infrastructure held up during the pandemic and what we need to kind of learn from this experience for moving forward and making sure the sector is resilient, going ahead. So if you've been here before, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. If this is your first time, then do please come back, as we have one of these every week. And it's always kind of interesting discussions about the future. So focusing less on the current news cycle and more on what comes next. So without further ado, because we've only got like 57 minutes to go, I will pass on to our moderator today, who's Andrew Jay, Executive Director at CBRE. And he will run you through how we'll conduct this webinar. Thank you and welcome. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Sabina. Welcome to everybody. So as well as being at CBRE, I'm also the chair of Tech UK's Data Centre Group. So I have the pleasure of working with Emma and Sam and others in the good work that's done there. So today the topic's around data centres. Collectively, what have we learned from COVID-19? We're going to cover, this is where Sam comes in, government policy changes that have been needed to protect the sector's resilience and also protect our competitiveness for the future. And we're going to talk about how they're likely to be implemented. We'll talk about the implications for the operators, the supply chain that supports them, and the customers who ultimately depend on the data centres. And I've got four fabulous speakers. We've got Sam Roberts from Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS. And Sam, he's going to cover the government response, the priorities and what the team have been doing, what they're going to do over the next 12 months. Amber Villegas Williamson is with Uptime. She's a technical consultant there. Uptime have been massively helpful during COVID-19. She's going to give us an insight into some of the issues that data centre operators have been reporting. They've got data on business continuity, demand, people's responses, costs, etc. So she's going to give us an insight to that. Welcome to Nel Cresswell, who's the CEO at Virtus Data Centres. I think Neil is probably building more data centres in the UK than anybody else at the moment. And so obviously great to hear how the operations of the data centres and how the build and supply chain has been affected and some of the things that Neil's been putting in place to mitigate some of those issues. And finally, almost needs no introduction, Emma, with Tech UK, who runs the Data Centre Council at Tech UK. She's done so much of the hard work in terms of liaison with government, and she's going to talk about how the government have responded, how we as an industry have responded, and particularly the new relationship with the government now that data centres are very much viewed as being an important part of UK infrastructure. So just in terms of format, I think we're going to have 5, 6, 7 minutes from each of the speakers just on their particular topics. We'll then throw it open to questions. Please use the chat function. I'll check for questions and I'll then put those back to the panelists. If you've got someone specific you'd like to ask a question of, please make it clear in the chat and I'll do what I can to get through as many as we can. We've got a hard stop at 12. The session is recorded, so please be aware of that, and it will be put, I think, up online. I think that's it. So I'm going to hand over to Sam Roberts from DCMS.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to come and talk to you all about this. So I thought best to kind of just lay out what we've been doing for the last few months, and I can talk a bit about what the plans might be for the future for government. So as you say, I represent the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. And as a result of the UK's strategy for the containment and management of the coronavirus pandemic, on March 23rd, the UK obviously introduced a number of measures to limit movement and introduce precautions to control the spread of the virus. So from early April, I've been working, and my team have been working with Tech UK and the data center sector to try and understand what issues there might be and how we can try and mitigate those. So the sector was highlighted as a crucial area of focus for us, particularly in light of the general behavior changes that we saw in the country as a result of the lockdown. So we see a lot of people working from home. Obviously, we all are. We saw a lot of people schooling from home. We saw a lot of people relying on digital and online services to order food and things of this nature. And we understood that, a lot of this is underpinned by the work that goes on in this sector. So, we felt that it was important to look at this holistically, because while certain parts of the sector are already covered by existing teams across government, we felt it would be prudent to assess the resilience of the sector in its entirety and look to align where feasible with landing pieces of work happening within government. So this is very much a kind of a step change in the way the government's been looking at the kind of the sector in general. The establishment of my team was really important in order to respond to queries and address concerns also raised directly from the sector. So I think one of the key learnings that we've taken from this period was the importance of an open dialogue. So minor things in the grand scheme of things, but setting up things like an inbox that people could just fire questions into, having weekly calls with Emma and her team at Tech UK, but also with the sector itself to try and update on how things are moving, what the kind of key policy questions might be, were really important. And that really helped us to kind of communicate a number of things. Some of the areas that we looked into were things like key worker status. We managed to secure this quite early on. So this is for travel and emergency childcare and school provision to ensure that people could make it into the data centers and actually continue with, the most important maintenance and routines that needed to be done. We looked at travel and access to specialist labour during the recent travel restrictions and quarantine policies. So this is again trying to pave the way for experts from across the world to be able to still make it into the UK and deal with issues if they arose. We looked at construction. Again, this is all about alignment within government. So there is a broader construction policy, and we wanted to make sure that we were able, where possible, to ensure that construction could continue. So obviously, social distancing and all of the kind of health precautions that need to be taken were important, but also if it was possible to keep construction rolling, even at a minimum level, we were very keen on ensuring that took place. We looked at access to testing and making sure that there was the opportunity and the option for people to access that provision once it was available. And finally, we've been looking at supply chain resilience, which is an area that's kind of developing currently, but it's something that, again, as a result of this coronavirus response, a lot of government is looking at different supply chains for different sectors. And it's something that we're very keen on understanding more closely so that we can kind of set policy that's appropriate to ensure that's made resilient too. So as I say, the COVID response work across kind of my department started to ease during May. But the data infrastructure resilience team that I've been working in has remained in post and will remain in post for another year at least to support longer term project objectives and address issues of security and resilience for the sector. And also, as I say, aligning with the wider government kind of priorities. As I say, the coronavirus situation has shone a spotlight really on the criticality of physical data infrastructure. This is the first time, as I say, that Whitehall is looking at this as its own sector in its entirety, as opposed to the supply chains of others. And we feel it's right that we consider this as an essential capability. So this goes back to what you were saying, Andrew. Very important that we look at this as an essential underpinning kind of piece of infrastructure for wider economic and kind of societal outcomes, I guess. Resilience and security are competitive drivers in this sector, so we're really keen on assessing whether there is a greater role for government to play, given the reliance on data centers across the data-driven economy and wider society. So very important that we continue this pace. And also, given the complexity of the market and the sophisticated service offering that you will kind of make. We're very keen to work with you all going forward and understand the nature of commercial relationships, trends within the sector, and how we can ensure future proofing in the policy making. And that could be across a number of areas, as I mentioned, things like skills, things like access to the right kind of materials that you will need, and ensuring that there is kind of an inbuilt infrastructural resilience going forward. So that's I think that's the long and short of it.
Great, thanks, Sam. So just an opportunity for me to say thank you to you for the work that you're doing at DCMS. And I have to say, the level of engagement that we as an industry are now getting from government has changed many-fold through this pandemic. And I think certainly we're keen for anybody on the call today to let us know if there's anything they specifically want to look at from a government policy point of view. I mean, that's very much the core of what the Tech UK Council's doing. But you know, the level of engagement we've had with you has been superb. So as I say, thank you for that. Amber, I think you're going to give us some perspectives from the Uptime Institute.
So I just unmuted myself. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Emma and Tech UK, for inviting me onto the panel. Yeah, so obviously the same with other companies. Uptime Institute at the beginning of January, we started to see the early onset, especially with our teams over in Asia, having to cope with the pandemic before it came over into Europe, and dealing with their lessons learnt from that perspective. And then in March, we obviously had the pandemic reach Europe, and we started to have our lockdowns across Europe, and Uptime Institute started to engage with the market in terms of trying to provide as best as we can collected information across all of the clients and people that we deal with on a daily basis in terms of how they have been responding. We've done several different surveys. We did one in April. We've actually repeated a similar survey again, so I have some of the results here. I know that Andrew and the rest of the Uptime Intelligence team are working on getting out an additional report and further information to the market. Some of the key things, and I was discussing this with Emma from Tech UK the other day, is the data center sector in itself has always been almost hidden from mainstream public view, mainstream public knowledge. And this pandemic, as awful as it is, has actually highlighted the importance of the work that we do within data centers. One of the things we have seen is a very collaborative effort across all different data centers globally. We put out a response in terms of, has your data center ever had, have you had an impact, outage or delay in service based on COVID? From that, we actually had 3% in the recent July survey come back with, yes, they have had an outage which is directly related to COVID-19 that has impacted services to client or slowdown of information. We also had a 4% which said yes, they have had a COVID-related slowdown, so not an outage, but a slowdown of IT services to clients. No. We had a response of no. 10% said that they have had some level of outage or slowdown. However, it's not attributed to COVID directly, with the remaining 84% saying that actually they have had no outage or experienced any impact whatsoever. So this reflects, the July survey actually reflects very much what we saw in April. We did have one client, and I will share details because obviously, as people know, many people don't want to know that they've had a COVID-related outage, but this particular client, who's actually based in Chile, they're called Entel, not Intel with an I, but Entel. They've got several data centers across Chile, some in Peru. They actually had a positive case of COVID-19 within their data center with one of their team members back in April of this year. And they've done a lot of tier certifications with us, both tier 3 and tier 4, design, construction, and they've also done a lot on the operational sustainability side, and M&O certificates. They actually shared this information with us, and they said, we're very pleased for you to give this information to other data centers, because anything that we have done which can have a positive impact and prevent others from having to go through the same scenarios, or whether our planning will help support other data centers. So they were very open about that, and we did do a webinar in Spanish, which is available on our website. They're a telecoms company. So what we have seen is quite a lot of collaboration happening, not only locally in the UK, and I'm sure that Neil will discuss this, that he's obviously been speaking to other data center owner operators within the UK, because we're going through this pandemic together. Again, in the July survey, we've seen how will this, as a result of this pandemic, we're looking at the long term. How has this affected your data center? They said, it will improve our pandemic readiness and actually disaster recovery plans. So one of the key things that we've seen is that people have now gone, we need to make sure that we have plans ready. Even if we don't use them, we need to have them there. We need to have them ready. 96% said that they agreed with this. Sorry if the figures are a little 95, 96, because we haven't actually officially released them yet. So we will increase the use of remote monitoring and the use of automation. So these are the two things that we've seen people agree heavily on, that automation moving forward and remote monitoring is going to be something that we are going to see more in terms of the adoption in data centers. And I mean, they were high 70, 80s in terms of agreement on those. And we've also seen 64% of people in the survey respond that they are looking to increase the resiliency of their data centers. And I know that Sam mentioned that resiliency is something that's very, very key. And in the longer term, people are looking to increase their actual resiliency of each data center, so that they are able to cope with an outage or an impact in their data center, which having the additional resiliency will help support them with. We have seen people move more to remote working, especially since we've had all of the lockdowns. We did see in the UK in particular an increase in internet traffic of up to 78%. Our download speeds actually decreased by 30, and I know that many people, it's been in the news that Netflix and Amazon Prime Video actually reduced the quality of their video to enable the demand that we're having with all these remote workers and demand for services. In terms of loading across data centers, I was again speaking to Emma about this. Typically, we've seen people saying they've experienced about 10% above their nominal pre-COVID levels in terms of additional IT load. I did have one client mention that they had an additional of 40. This was something that was specific to one particular data center, which I can't name for confidentiality reasons. But what they actually explained is that they were provisioning for the additional load, but much later on in the year. But it all happened back in March when COVID impacted everyone. So I'm just looking around for additional data that I've written. So one of the key things that we've also seen is more people remote working. And again, we're going to see far more people remote working, far fewer people within data centers on a daily basis. We are going to be seeing people reducing the number of visitors and actually operational staff on site is one of the key things that people were saying. And data centers in themselves, even though we are seeing limited effects in terms of our operations, we have been impacted. The personnel is something that is going to be an ongoing issue. In terms of costings, we're seeing higher operational costs, especially for this period. There was much maintenance at the beginning of the pandemic that was deferred, which is now having to be completed. Again, we've had teams, the rescheduling of teams, shift patterns, overtime that's going to be needed to be paid out. There will probably be bonuses as well for additional staffing hours, etc. So in terms of the overall impact to data centers, we won't escape the pandemic. However, we are a very resilient sector of industry, and it is favouring us in the long term that people now see the criticality of what we do and hopefully moving forward, we will be able to service the wider community better. Thank you.
Wow, there's a lot there. I'm loving some of those stats in terms of tangible information, and we'll move on now, Amber, but certainly that 3% of actual outages is one that I'd love you to talk more about, and also I'd love to understand more about this increased resilience. I think we kind of got to a very much a particular specification there or thereabouts in your world, tier 3, and that could be quite interesting if people are suddenly thinking we need to go above and beyond that. There's cost implications and efficiency implications. So fascinating. Right, a perfect segue into to Neil at Virtus, running and building so many of these data centers, a lot for the hyperscalers. Neil, tell us all about it. What are you finding?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to Tech UK for organising this as well. Before I start, I'd also like to echo Andrew's comments, thanking Sam and DCMS team over the last 3 months. I know he's getting very embarrassed by all the thanks he's getting, but it really has been, very different to some experiences we've had before, and incredibly helpful. Having somebody to speak to every week, every day, if needed, to get clarity on government policy, which wasn't always clear. So that's been really, really helpful and really effective. As Andrew mentioned, hopefully, if you're in the UK data center industry, you'll have heard of Virtus. If not, we have 6 live data centers, and we're building 4 at the moment. One of the data centers actually went live in the last 3 months, which was an interesting project. And we've got another 2 waiting in the wings. And another data point, I guess, is those 2 were actually, the investment for those 2 was also approved during the last 3 months. So again, good signs that the business was continuing well during that time. And the challenges we saw, same as everybody, I think, we just early on, a lot of unknowns as to what was going to happen, what was happening, how we should best react. I think that's countered by, in our sector, and I'm kind of speaking for our sector here rather than just Virtus, business continuity planning, resilience planning is in our DNA. It's what we do. So, we did have plans in place, and but there were a lot of unknowns, and we got out early. So I think the first thing we did was probably in January, where we restricted all travel to mid-January to China. And you might know we're part of a larger global group, the STT Telemedia Global Data Centers Group. So we have a sister company in China, sister company in Singapore. So we were forewarned and forearmed by them to a certain extent, which was fortunate for us. But a lot of unknowns. So in the planning, we lent heavily on any views we could get from people like you. Uptime Institute were very helpful in that. But also the Tech UK group of 10, 15 leading UK data center companies. We all met weekly, organized very well by Emma and team, and got a lot of there wasn't a real handbook for this at that time, so we all kind of learned as we were going along. But we did all act early, we acted fast. We key things: communicate early, communicate often, and be very clear and decisive and visible in what your priorities are and what you're doing. And I think the communication across the industry and the actions were generally very good. I mean, our goals were very clear from day one: safety first. That was above operations, above construction, safety first. Whether that's the physical well-being of staff, but also the mental well-being of staff, that was our number one concern. And we communicated with our customers and agreed that up front with them, in January. That's the policy we were going to take. And, all customers, I can't think of a single customer who didn't agree with that policy, that that's the policy we should take. Obviously, secondly, with that safety first constraint, you know, the next key is live operations. You know, make sure nothing happens to live operations. So that was our second priority. And that was about planning for, you know, the worst case. What happens if we can't get anybody to the data center? What happens if we can't get supplies to the data center, people, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So we spent most of February really putting steps in place and planning for that with our, you know, epidemic or pandemic management team, and doing a lot of the things that I know a lot of people have done, you know, isolating, segregating teams, planning what's the minimum team you can run with at each data center, setting up remote and reserve teams, as well as monitoring the availability of all staff. At the beginning, it was interesting, at the beginning there were a lot of staff unavailable, not because they were ill, but because they were you know, potentially living with a vulnerable person, or you know, associated with a vulnerable person, and that reduced probably 50% of our available staff, you know, and that's 200-300 people. But over time, that came back again. I think we, like most people, we haven't had a confirmed infection in any of our sites. We've had a few in the construction area, but not one in any of our live operational sites. And you know, a lot of that maybe was down to like most people, we went to restricted access almost straight away, essential visits only, no sales visits, essential maintenance only. And again, working in tandem with customers to keep operations going, but do it in a you know, as lean a manner as possible, to make sure that you know, the less people in the data center, the better. And generally, you know, customers have been really accepting of that. I think it's been very, very pleasing to see. And on the construction side, construction has been delayed. Certainly at the beginning, some sites were shut down completely, depending on what phase of the construction they were at. If they were indoors, it's very difficult to work indoors and socially distance and continue working. So those shuts pretty much stopped work for a month or so. You know, some supplies were constrained as well. The sites working outdoors generally continued, but in a reduced capacity. So we generally think we've lost probably 3 months, I would say, in elapsed time on hitting, you know, RFS dates on those, you know, 4 projects that we're doing. But again, customers very understanding. You know, so long as you work with them, communicate with them, let them know why and what. You know, everybody's been really understanding. And in terms of demand, you know, demand hasn't stopped. You know, we've been signing customers throughout. Some of our bigger customers have called forward demand during the period. So, you know, that's been pleasing to see that from a business point of view, the sector hasn't really been impacted from a demand point of view, and none of our customers in all sectors you know, seem to have suffered financially. Everybody's still carrying on. We haven't seen any you know, defaults or anything. So I think we got out early, we acted fast, we were very clear on our priorities, good, you know, very clear on our communication. I think, so we were erring on the side of caution always, and I think we still are. So we put a plan together which had 4 levels of severity. We got to level 3. I think we went to level 3 probably about the 10th of March, so a couple of weeks before the UK lockdown, and we are still at level 3 as far as we're concerned. We're still operating under that mode, and we probably will continue to do that for a while. We never went to level 4, thankfully. And talking to our customers, they're fine with that. We just want to see how things carry on for the next few weeks, and we can operate at that level given the level of staff availability and supplies, almost indefinitely, though obviously we don't want to. So that's the situation we are at the moment. I think the lessons learned from our point of view, we did have plans in place, but as famous saying, all plans disappear as they hit reality. So the plans needed updating, they needed tweaking, that needed to be done fast, even if you got some things wrong. Better to do something than nothing. The communication, learn from everybody, people like UTI, Uptime, Tech UK partners, different parts of the world that we've spoken to. And then I think we will be changing our policies on something. Supplies, definitely. It's interesting when you go down into this, down into the supply chain on construction and live operations, and just how vulnerable are you from parts from Northern Italy or PPE or, all of these things that you probably hadn't quite thought through. And then just communication. We instituted calls with staff every day and every week, which is probably something we should have been doing anyway, but we just didn't do it beforehand. And, that's gone down really well. And I think the collaboration in the industry has been fantastic. We're all competitors, but, we all can share, certain amounts of our policies and procedures and learnings, for the greater good in the group and in the Tech UK group. And that's been really, really impressive and really effectual as well. So good job, Emma. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. For the wonders of modern technology, I've just had the obligatory Amazon delivery, which I've had to just dash off and deal with. So if you saw some hand signals of the chap in the window wanting to sign for something, that was what it was. Apologies. Just one quick one, Neil, and we've had a couple of questions on this. Just the practicalities of particularly wearing PPE, disposing of PPE. How's that gone? Has everybody been pretty good on that? Have you been pretty, I would imagine, pretty regimental around the use of it? How's that worked?
Yeah, I think we're obviously running a data center with typically, something like 20 to 30% of the people who would normally be in it on any given day. So our tracking, some of our data centers, the busiest ones, get 150 visitors a day. That was down at kind of 30, 40, 50. So it's much easier to socially distance yourself, work in segregated areas, keep customers, contractors, people apart, have them regularly cleaned. So we were very hot on sanitization, cleaning. We didn't mandate that people wear masks. We had screening at the door, with health. You couldn't get into the facility without being health screened and temperature checked and questioned and tracked. But we didn't mandate that people wore PPE, but we went more for the hat, but they were available to people if they wanted them. And I think it was probably about 50-50, and that's still the case. But we were very big on, sanitization, avoiding coming into contact with other people, and, customers were very helpful with that as well. So that's
interesting. Thanks, Neil. Let's talk to Emma, and Emma, you can talk for hours on this, but just give us 5, 6, 7 minutes on how the industry's worked with government, some of the real specific, tangible things that have been happening. Over to you.
So, I would just echo what Neil has said about this fantastic collaboration that's happened between competitors in sort of the common interest of the industry, and that's been really good to see. Lots of information sharing, lots of comparing notes, and people being very candid, a really unusual degree of openness, I think. And we have had with the Data Centres Council, that's always been the case, but I think it's been more so and more broadly across the sector. And the other thing I'm also echoing Neil, is just how early on operators were putting measures in place. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've had such low incidences of infection on site. And I know a number of operators, particularly international ones, had implemented shift segregation in January. So long before requirements came in from government. And similarly, as Neil said, those restrictions within the data centres and the precautions haven't actually been relaxed in line with policy. They'll lag some way behind that. And I suspect it'd be quite interesting to know how many of them will remain in place. And then really my job is sort of sitting between industry and government, or between the rock and a hard place, as it usually is. And that's been a delight this time, because we asked government the question about key worker status for data centre workers on, I think it was about the 17th of March. And we were added explicitly as data infrastructure to the list that was published, I think, if I'm right, on the 19th of March. I hope that's right, Sam. And at the same time, within 24 hours, they'd set up this team. And I think that's the fastest ever response I've seen from government on anything in my entire working life in policy. So I thought that was really remarkable. So that's been great, just to have that response, to have that instant recognition, and then to actually be able to have a grown-up conversation, because usually we've sort of dealt with different bits of government on different issues, and each time we've had to explain what data centres are. And although we've done that, we've only had to do it once. And then really, from my point of view, it's been a massive exercise in information gathering, information exchange, both ways. So within the time we've collected information on the precautions operators are taking, why we would need quarantine exemptions. We've done stuff on footfall to site, on construction projects, the steps operators are taking for recovery. And that tends to be going into government. But then we've also done a number of briefings for operators on things like mental health, and actually a lot of the stuff we've done has simply just been to allow operators to compare notes with other operators and think, oh, actually we're doing that, but we're not doing that. So I think that's been reasonably helpful. And we've also put out things like FAQs and position statements. So it's been pretty busy. And then just in terms with as Sam said, that the relationship with government is a really seismic change, because this is actually a specific focus on our sector. And if I'm wrong, Sam, but really the two priority areas are looking at, obviously, the resilience of the sector extends across supply chain, skill sorts of things, and also our competitiveness. And that will look at some of the other challenges that the sector has in terms. So it's I think it's going to be a really interesting 12 months looking ahead. I think that's probably all I need to say, but it has been it's been a very busy time in the last few months, and I think now we'll have a slightly more structured way of looking at these challenges ahead.
Thanks, Emma. That's the shortest piece I think I've ever heard you do in my life. So that's astonishing. Just one of the questions which has come up is critical national infrastructure designation, and I guess this is one that perhaps you can give a view on from the industry, and then maybe Sam can talk to. But we've seen other countries designate data centres as CNI, and there's certain benefits from that. Also, that there's certain potential around regulation and things which may not be so appealing. Talk to me about that, and where do you think the industry might go with CNI designation?
So it's not up to us, is the first thing I'd say. And secondly, it's very unlikely to be a kind of a blanket sector-wide application. So CNI is designated by working back from single points of failure. This is an important national function. What is supporting it? Is there a single point of failure? And Cabinet Office traditionally have gone through that route to identify. So certain data centre facilities are already designated CNI. It's not many. And I suspect that actually may continue, although of course there is an opportunity to look at different solutions for this rather than being CNI or not CNI. And again, as I said, it would be individual sites. I think it's interesting to make comparisons. There are countries like Scandinavian countries, so for instance, Finland, all data centers, I believe, are designated CNI, but I suspect that's something to do with their geographical location. And then in Germany, about 5 years ago, I think all data centers over 5 megawatts were designated CNI. And I know there was a lot of, that was quite a challenging time while that was being done. But I have heard feedback from operators so designated that it has massively eased things during the last few months for them. So it's, to some extent, there's a bit of quid pro quo, but it's not a binary question, and I don't think anybody's made any decisions or not. I think what we have accepted is that data centers are fairly critical to the operation of the internet and everything that sits on top of that. But beyond that, I think it's all up for discussion. But I'll hand over to Sam because he may have more to say.
Thanks, Emma. I mean, just to be clear, like this whole kind of question is not one really that I can answer specifically. It's something that sits in particular parts of government, and but I can speak to it to a degree. So, as you say, CNI are basically facilities, systems, information networks, processes that are kind of necessary for a country to function, and upon which kind of daily life depends, right? So, it also includes functions, sites, organizations which are not critical to the maintenance of essential services, but which need protection due to potential danger to the public. So for instance, like civil nuclear sites or things of that nature. So there are kind of 13 defined CNI sectors, and this is all on the website, in various forms. That includes things like communications, energy, food, health, transport, this kind of stuff. Because data infrastructure isn't a defined sector in and of itself, it's a component of other CNI sectors. And this is the thing that we're kind of working through at the moment, and something that we'll be looking at going forward. So for instance, providing the physical network that facilitates internet connectivity or transmitting and storing data that supports the delivery of healthcare, those things would be CNI, but the wider sector is something that, again, we've not looked at holistically before. So, in addition to the existence of data infrastructure in CNI, there are kind of 3 areas of data sets that are captured. So customer details, operating data, and sort of sensitive data. These things all kind of sit within the data center infrastructure as well. So we're kind of having to do a bit of a job of piecing things together and working backwards through the system, as you quite rightly say. And I guess there is a longer term question here about what actually falls under that remit. But it's something that, it is quite well defined, and there are trade-offs in kind of looking to try and assign that kind of attribution, I guess, to the wider sector. So as I say, it's something that we're looking to work with you going forward to kind of establish I guess align it with the current kind of landscape.
I think certainly a lot of people have said to me that because the industry's responded so quickly and worked so closely with government through this pandemic, that actually the benefits we would have had under CNI have come through anyway. And so, again, they're very complimentary about the government on this occasion, which is good to hear. I'd like to just pick up with Amber on the survey. And the survey is really good. That 3% is the number that I got in my mind. 3% of COVID outages or impacts. Can you just give us a little bit more on that, Amber? But really want to get into the detail. You mentioned Entel in Chile. What happened? Why was there an outage? Talk to us about it.
Okay, so Entel in Chile actually didn't experience an outage. What they did have was a case of one of their operations team having a positive COVID result. And obviously, as Neil has mentioned, one of the key things about data center people is we like to plan. We like to have plans in place. We like to make sure that we have everything scaled, that we have considered, the worst case scenarios, and we will effectively prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So what they did was similar along the lines of what Neil was saying about how they created an analysis to have a staged phase in and phase out of the severity levels of the data center. They had they actually classified all of their staff members to say, you know, this person, they live in this particular area, which means to get to the data center, to get to work, they will have to be commuting by public transport. So they are going to have a higher risk to the data center. So if the level or the COVID level within the country gets to a certain stage, what we will do is actually provide transportation for them, their own transportation, so that they are circumventing the need for public transport and being able to access the data center. What actually happened was, sorry, I just made a note, is the operator themselves who was tested positive, it was because the gentleman's daughter is actually a nurse who was working with COVID patients. He called in and said not feeling well, etc. What they did was immediately they said anybody who was on shift with this person is now at home self-isolating for 14 days. They were checking on the team. They actually did a full decontamination of the data center itself, especially paying attention to the areas where they know that this person was working in. So if they were conducting maintenance in a particular area, they spent additional time disinfecting that particular site. They didn't have any follow-up cases. Nobody else on the team was impacted at all. But it just goes to show that when you have prepared and you follow through on your plans, that they work, they hold water. But they were very clear about how they were calculating the number of people that are required in the data center. And like Neil said, they had various different levels. One of the levels was to a point where they appointed a chef to come in and cook for part of the team. We've had data centers in the US who have basically self-isolated an entire operations team on site for 30 days. There are sites that are in countries in Africa who are preparing or have prepared to have operational staff on site 24/7 for a duration of time, including families, because they want to make sure that if your staff are happy, your mental health is important. And one of the key concerns is how are your family being affected? So one of the data centers actually rented out a whole apartment opposite the data center and said any operational staff who are going to be allocated here are going to be in this particular place with their families. So it's one of these things that when you have your plans in place and you progress through them, then obviously it works. So the 3% that you have in your mind is actually come from the July survey. So we repeated the one that we did in April, which was actually very, very similar. It was, I think, slightly higher, the one that we did in April, but the July one has come to 3% of an actual outage. In terms of further details, it was just a yes/no survey, so I don't actually have any further details. It might be something that Andrew, Lawrence and the team are going to be contacting the people who responded to sort of say, are you willing to have an in-depth conversation about this? Much of the information that we have provided on our website with the webinars. I know we had a question about the PPE. One of the levels that Intel did was anybody coming into the data center, they actually have to change from their outdoor clothes, wash their hands and face, and change into overalls for the site. So they had a clear definition or almost like a gap between the outside world and the inside data center, where you have to obviously clean. They implemented mandatory masks on their sites. So I think the key thing for us, and like Emma was saying, is that the collaboration that we're seeing in the sector is something that personally I really do hope that I see continue, because I do think it's beneficial not only for individual data centers, but I do think for the data center community as a whole. We're all learning from each other's lessons, and hopefully the information that we've provided by Uptime on the website has helped to collaborate a lot of that.
Thanks, Amber. Neil, on the operations side, you've implemented some very clear processes and procedures, some of which Amber's just been amplifying as well. Do you think there's going to be change long term, so post-COVID, whenever that's going to be, to how we run data centers most effectively?
Yeah, I think so. I think people mentioned remote monitoring. So that's something we've been doing for a while. You know, having 6, probably 10 live data centers, you know, we've always been in the process of having the ability to monitor from other data centers. I think we've definitely fast forwarded that project now, through, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, as always. So that's one area where I think, you know, the ability to run remotely will, you know, has really been highlighted to us, and, you know, using more monitoring software. I think somebody mentioned artificial intelligence, or just automation monitoring, you know, anything that you can do on that front. It's interesting how, you know, we got down to levels of, you know, minimum shift teams compared to the normal of, you know, probably 20-30% of our available staff. So we could have 3 teams. I think, as was said, you know, we did have people who had symptoms, and in the early days when there was no testing going on, you had to assume that they had it. So we had to track and trace and send anybody who'd been in contact with them in the last 7 days home. So that's why the availability was kind of low at the beginning. As it turned out, none of them were tested positive in the end, but you have to assume the worst. So, you know, being able to run, you know, in that scenario, I think is something that we'll be carrying on, you know, looking at in, you know, what's the leanest we can run at, because I think it's highlighted to us all that this could happen again, you know, might happen again in the winter, might be something else, but it's never really happened before in Europe. Well, not in the last 500 years anyway, but, you know, it's something that we need to be more, better prepared for, probably.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree with that, Neil, absolutely. And what about, you said that there've been some delays, actually a lot less delay than I thought you were going to say. I mean, you mentioned like a month, but I know you have some extremely demanding customers. What's the attitude been of those customers? Has it been, let's get the contract out and start beating people up, or has it been a very collaborative, hopefully, approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very collaborative, and the delays the elapsed time delays are probably 3 months, but we're finding that they're coming back in again to say 2.5 months now once things get going, because we'd erred on the side of caution again that we might not get back to full production for a long time, whereas actually we're up at 85-90%, you know, full productivity on all sites, you know, now. But no, their attitude was the same as ours. Safety first, you know, number one. You know, nobody, and I think you and I spoke about it at the beginning, you know, nobody wants to be in a situation where you force somebody to work and they get ill or, you know, heaven forbid, die for the sake of building a data center a month early. It's just not worth it. So, you know, safety first. They wanted to know that we were doing everything we could to mitigate delays, and that was a lot of the communication. You know, how can you buy generators early? Can you do this? Can you do that? And very helpful and collaborative on that front. But nobody got the contract out and said you must do this. It was safety first for everybody, really.
That's really good to hear. And on supply chain and building data centers, you know, we're in a new norm at the moment of the 200 megawatts a year of new build just in the flat markets, and a lot of the supply chain has been under stress and strain anyway. What's your view, Neil, of the impact of COVID-19 on that supply chain, and are we going to have some issues coming forward that sort of bite us when the pandemic is finished?
I don't think there'll be issues. No, I think, you know, somebody mentioned that, you know, we've been running on essential maintenance only, or prioritized maintenance only for a while. And there's only so long you can do that for, you know, so that there might be a backlog of maintenance, you know, low-level maintenance jobs coming forward. But on the supply of major equipment and major parts, I think, like us, most people are now looking further out in their demand chain and ordering, you know, whereas they may have ordered you'd start a project, you'd order at the beginning of the project. Now you're looking maybe a project or two forward and ordering in bulk, years in advance. And so the supply, it might be beneficial for the suppliers that they might be getting more forward bulk orders, so everybody's got their supply chain more assured than maybe they ran with in the past. But look, I think the level of demand hasn't changed. It's maybe gone up a little bit, and it's maybe been brought forward a little bit because of the macro factors of the world switching to a more cloud-based model and more digital model, but not enough to move the needle on. There won't be enough generators or UPSs or that worldwide. I would say.
Okay. I'm just conscious we only got 3 minutes left, but one of the things I wanted to ask Amber about was around her comment on increasing the resilience and redundancy of the M&E infrastructure. But Neil, are you seeing that and your customers on the levels of redundancy and resilience that they require?
We have seen it, but maybe not COVID related, maybe just generally. I think the criticality of who our customers are and what they do and what they're running. The criticality of what they do has only been further highlighted. So a second's downtime is disastrous. So anything we can do on adding in extra resilience in design and engineering, we are considering doing. So I think that's N+2 or 2N rather than N+1. Just give yourself an extra few minutes to react, I think.
So if I were to put you on the spot then, Neil, and be black and white about it, do you think that actually going forward resilience levels are going to have to increase a little bit, or are they going to stay the same, or are they going to go down? Because the trend, I think, was, broadly speaking, to be going down because resilience was built into the application layer.
From what I see, is infrastructure resilience is going up. The level of infrastructure resilience that people are requesting, maybe the resilience at the software level isn't quite what it was, isn't quite there. So infrastructure resilience, or the need for that is getting more and more prevalent. So that's kind of what we're seeing. If you can have a third option which gives you more sleepful nights, then that's a good thing for everybody.
Neil. Amber, I think last comments from you just on that question, and then I'm going to be drawing things to
Okay, perfect. So I'm just literally going to highlight exactly what Neil has been saying. In terms of the survey, we've had a 64% people agree that actually we're going to see the level of infrastructure resilience increase. I was speaking to Andy yesterday, and we've actually seen one cloud service provider who is a tier 3 or tier 3 design typically, instead of being as an N+1, as Neil was saying, going to an N+2 design just to allow themselves that additional design margin in there. I think as a whole, the industry is going to see more monitoring and management in terms of remote services. We'll also see additional automation of facilities. That's something that is highlighted on here.
Fantastic, Amber, thank you so much. That's it, bang on 12 o'clock. I'd like to thank Neil, Sam, Amber and Emma for being superb panelists, making my job very, very easy. So thank you very much indeed. Hopefully people have had some rich thoughts that they've taken away with them from this webinar. There have been lots and lots of questions. We haven't been able to get through them all, so apologies. But thanks for joining, and look forward to seeing you all soon.